You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. Mark Dailey here, welcoming you on board for this week's show. And a big welcome to my special co-host tonight, Josh Shimizu, on Twitter at the Mayor of Shimtown. Or is it just Mayor of Shimtown, Josh? I was getting
It's just Mayor of Shimtown.
There you go. I almost got it right, but welcome aboard. And of course, Josh is my fellow co-contributor on the TWAD. And Josh, would just take a second to explain to everybody what a TWAD is, because people want to know.
Well, it's just the mixture of a podcast and Twitter. It kind of came up. I mean, Twadcast isn't a new concept, but as I looked over the hashtag, I didn't find a lot of Twadcasts going on. In fact, probably the latest Twadcast that happened was probably a couple of years ago.
Okay.
So as a couple of us had been already doing, we decided to kind of formalize it and give it a name. And the name that we came up with was made up by one of our friends, Dan, who is Formula D, at Formula D on Twitter. And he just started calling it the TWAD because a lot of people call podcasts like, you know, we're doing the pod tonight, or they just call it a pod. So we decided to come up with the TWAD.
That's very cool. And if you wanted to give the TWAD a follow, very easy. It's at the TWAD, and there's usually some discussion on Formula One or Indy cars, or sometimes something completely random. So give us a follow and join in. That's always a good discussion, and we'd love to have you. So moving along, Josh. Wow, what an exciting Grand Prix and an unexpected turn of events at Hockenheim over the weekend. There are so many different things to talk about, but before we talk about, I guess we could call it an exciting and also somewhat controversial race with some of the things that happened later on. We'll get into that. But let's talk first about qualifying briefly. And the big talking point, of course, was Lewis Hamilton going out in during, what was it, Q2, I think it was. He had a hydraulic problem, ran wide going into turn one, came back over the curbs very, very, really hard. I mean, he caught air, but there was a lot of air underneath. But I think it's safe to say that you don't see Lewis Hamilton run that wide on a corner unless there's a problem. I mean, everybody uses the curbs, but I think he was rather critical about Nico Rosberg, of course, his former teammate. Apparently the hate for Nico was still real, but he did have too many flattering things to say about Nico after the qualifying. Nico said that he thought the problems caused after Lewis hit the curb at the exit of the corner there, and I think it's a bit of a combination of both. I think the problem was already manifesting itself, and then just nailing the curb the way that he did, I think it just exacerbated the problem that was already there. But we don't see Lewis Hamilton that far down in the order on the grid very often now, do we?
No, we don't. In fact, it was kind of interesting to see that happened. And of course, it was mechanical, so it's not really his fault. It all depends on when it happened. I mean, he said it happened before that incident, that they had the hydraulic issues. But one thing that I thought was pretty interesting is that after that, and he got out of his car, and he kind of had that dramatic moment where he hunched down next to his car. And it was funny how Nico Rosberg is still kind of screwing with his old teammate when he says, you know, I've never seen him that way. I've never seen him. There must be something different going on right now.
Well, that was kind of an interesting moment because, of course, Lewis did try to push the car back to the pits, because if he managed to get it back to the pits, he wouldn't have been eliminated from qualifying. He could go on, and he did say afterwards that it was a lot further than he thought, and you could tell he was pushing, and then Marshall came along to help him out, and then all of a sudden, you know, so you can see him, he's like all bleep. You can almost read it on his lips through his helmet. And then, but like you say, when they push the car off the track, just behind the wall there, just that whole moment where he was crouched down, leaning up against, the side of the cockpit there, leaning his helmet on the monocoque there.
Right.
Very unusual body language from Lewis Hamilton. And I think it just goes to show like how jacked up he really was, because I mean, the last two races in Austria and Great Britain really haven't gone Lewis's and Mercedes' way.
Exactly. That's the great thing about the championship right now, is that we have two drivers. Well, I think, two drivers that are so close together, and they're actually switching places every, 2 or 3 races. And when that happens, I think that the pressure really does increase on both drivers. In fact, when Vettel crashed out during the race, not to, get ahead of ourselves, but to get ahead of ourselves, when Vettel crashed out of the race, you could just hear the emotion in his voice. It sounded like he was crying.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting, the point that you raise here, because I mean, everybody knows that since 2014, it's basically been Mercedes' party in Formula One. They've completely dominated. Last year, we saw a little bit of a turn in the tides. Ferrari, of course, were able to win some races. Red Bull were able to win some races, but it was nowhere near as close as we've seen through the first half of 2018. I mean, exactly. It's been very, very interesting to watch. Just not only the way that Hamilton and Vettel have been trading wins back and forth, but just how the Red Bull boys have here and there been able to throw a wrench into the works, if you want to call it that, and win a couple of races here and there just to make the championship really interesting. But I think it really goes to show just how Ferrari has really narrowed that gap. And I don't really think that there is that much difference between the Ferrari and the Mercedes. Now, Toto Wolff was saying over the weekend is that he believes that they're losing, I think it was 0.5 of a second on the straights to the Ferrari, but again, in straight line speed. But you see that just any one of these cars, we saw how in Monaco that was Red Bull's party. And just how they, regardless of what happened to Max crashing out in free practice and starting from the back of the grid. But I mean, Ricciardo, even before he had the problem with his engine, I mean, he was just dominating. I mean, smashing the lap record left, right, and center. And then we've seen at different tracks and on different weekends just how each one of these cars can be better suited to whichever circuit it is than the other.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think that's, so it makes it exciting. I'm not a huge fan of the look of the cars. I'm not a huge fan of some of the things that race control do. But by and large, the drivers are giving us what we want. There are battles in the midfield, and I think that it's just good to have just good battles in between. The lower teams and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it really says a lot, even though, like you say, I mean, I like the general look of the cars that they introduced with the new regs that came out last year, but I've tried as much as I can to get used to the halo. And I know that we've seen a couple of instances this year already where it's probably done its job. I'm thinking specifically Brendan Hartley and Lance Stroll on the opening lap of the Canadian Grand Prix a month or so ago when they had that opening lap crash. But it still distracts for me every once in a while. It's just like, I think it really spoils the line of the car, but hey, I guess that's modern Grand Prix racing. But I do think that they look better than the cars did previously in the first couple of years of the hybrid turbo era. But still, I kind of look back maybe 10 years or so, maybe even the early 2000s. I think the cars were a lot sleeker, a lot more, I don't know, I think they're more aesthetically pleasing than they are now. But at least there's no shark fins and to a certain extent, and T-wings.
Maybe in the future they'll actually allow some of the teams and the engineers to be a little bit more creative. Right now, it seems like they're going through a phase that's a little more simplistic, a little bit more streamlined. But I'm not against winglets. I'm not against little gadgets and stuff like that. In fact, every once in a while this comes up as the whole active suspension debate. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but it would be interesting to see that come back.
Yeah, that was a fantastic, amazing piece of technology, and I've tweeted out a GIF of the Williams FW15B or whatever it was, or the C,
right,
from 1992, 1993. I mean, I think that's about as close that they ever came to giving a Formula One car life, if you want to like exaggerate that far. I mean, if you see the car, just how it reacted, it's just a picture of the car in the garage, and you can just see how it's going up and down. It was an amazing piece of technology, even more the amazing that it came out over 25 years ago. So imagine what they could do with it now. But let's get back to the German Grand Prix. So we had obviously that big moment with Lewis Hamilton, but still when we had the grid lining up for the race on Sunday, we had Sebastian Vettel on pole, Valtteri Bottas on second place, Kimi Räikkönen, Max Verstappen on row 2, Kevin Magnussen and Roman Grosjean. Haas, I thought, very impressive with a third row lockout, if you want to call it that. And then also, I thought also equally impressive in qualifying at least was Hülkenberg and Sainz on row 4 for Renault. And then I think that the driver of the year so far, or at least obviously the rookie of the year by a mile, and that would be Charles Leclerc in 9th, and then Sergio Perez in 10th for Force India, which, honestly was a bit of a rare occurrence to see a Force India as high up as 10th in qualifying. They haven't really been, they've been a solid midfield team for years, and I think they've had a pretty good claim on best of the rest, but I think that the problems that Vijay Mallya has been having with his businesses and his personal life and everything, I think that the team has suffered because of that. And they were just saying even the other day that they're just not financially able to keep up, and we're definitely seeing it there. And then just finally in 11th and 12th was Fernando Alonso in McLaren, and then in 12th position Sergei Sirotkin in I think a very good performance in qualifying for Williams. And we've talked all about Williams this year, haven't we?
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting. I think it's actually more interesting to see that Lance Stroll was in 17th.
Yeah.
He qualified in 17th, which was 5 below that. I'm just wondering why that's the case. I'm not sure if I've seen anything or read anything about that, but it's interesting to note.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of a difference between the two of them. And, through the first half of the season, most of the races, they've just been, it seems every weekend they've been they're qualifying further and further down through the pack and usually right at the bottom. So to see Sirotkin as high up as 12th in qualifying was very different. And of course, there was a rumor floating around earlier tonight, which is Tuesday, or today on Tuesday, which is coming from De Bilt in Germany. And apparently Lawrence Stroll, aka Lance's dad, aka one of the richest dudes on the face of the planet, has bought the aforementioned Force India. That is an interesting development if true, right, Josh?
It is. For me, it came out of left field because I wasn't following it that much. But if it happens, I'm all for it. I think, as you mentioned before, Vijay Mallya had some issues, legal issues back in India, and wasn't able to leave the UK, all that kind of stuff. And I'm wondering if that had a major role in him not being able to get more funding for the future.
That's an excellent point that you raise. This team needs something. Obviously, they've been sort of sliding down, not as sharply as Williams, obviously, over the past couple of years, but from where they were, even as recently, say, last year, definitely 2 years ago in 2016, they're really not quite the same as they were. And the team needs something. They need a breath of fresh air, or a fresh injection of funds or investors, or a new team principal, or maybe not team principal, but maybe a new ownership is what the team needs to move forward.
Yeah, I'm excited about Lawrence Stroll. He seems to be a sharp guy, somebody who could infuse some energy into the team, and specifically money into the team. And if he does that, I think I'm excited to see what can happen with Force India.
Yeah, because
or whatever it's going to be called in the future. I've been reading on Reddit. They have a thread about what they're going to name the team, and I think the consensus is probably something like Force Canada or something like that.
Yeah, that would be kind of interesting. But I know even I think it was about this time last year, there were several names that were trademarked or registered in the UK in regards to Force India. I can't even remember what the names were. So where that
Force One.
Yes, that's correct.
Force One was one of them. That was the only one I remember.
Yeah, that's correct. So what that has to do with Force India or the new team moving forward, that remains to be seen. But I'm not sure. I know that that Lawrence Stroll, I believe that one of the companies he owns is Michael Kors, which is a well-known fashion brand. And I'm not sure if he owns Tommy Hilfiger as well. He could do, which would be kind of interesting because, as we know, Tommy Hilfiger, a very prominent sponsor of Mercedes, and that's
exactly
and for any other design brands or designers out there, that's about as limited as my my knowledge as a dude goes. So I'm going to claim ignorance on the rest. But yeah, so definitely that would be an interesting development, and I think it's kind of interesting as well to see how the best of the rest is really shaping up. I think that we've seen a real, do you think it's safe to say a bit of stabilization, at least in qualifying from the Haas boys over the past, say, 2-3 races, maybe even 4?
Probably the last 2 races. Before that, it just seemed to be quite uneven. But I'm hoping they've turned a corner because, most of the headlines have been stolen by Romain Grosjean.
For all the wrong reasons.
For all the wrong reasons. And I'm hoping the results, this last race is kind of turning a corner, but we'll see. I guess only time will tell.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because if you look at the Drivers' Championship, K-Mag is in 9th position with 39 points, and then you look at Rogro, he's currently 13th with 20 points. But I think even as recent as Austria, I don't think Grosjean had a single point in the championship just because of all of his misadventures off and on the track, and all the problems he was having through his own fault and not of his his own doing. So I think it's good to see that they're starting to maybe live up to what I think was a real tease at the beginning of the year in Australia. I think that they really, for me, certainly, they really surprised the pace that they had in qualifying, the pace that they had to start the race. And then, of course, they had that double, I don't even know what to call it. I call it a moment, but where they both, or both the cars had their tires misfitted during the pit stop. And both of them came to a crawling halts just basically at the end of the pit lane, and they really struggled after that. But it was K-Mag that really sort of settled down a lot sooner than Grosjean. And Grosjean, it's good to see that he's doing something positive now, because I've been pretty critical of him. I think a lot of people have been critical of him. He's kind of one of these guys that when he's hot, he's doing pretty good, but when he blows cold, he is ice cold.
Yeah, it's kind of a comedy of errors, basically, with Grosjean. When I'm looking at K-Mag right now, he's 39. He's got 39 points, and Fernando Alonso has 40 points. It doesn't seem like Fernando Alonso is going to be. I don't know what's up with that McLaren, but I can see Kevin Magnussen progressing, and we've got Nico Hülkenberg that has 52 points. But if Kevin Magnussen remains on his trajectory, he could be the best of the rest.
Yeah, which would be, I think, a really good achievement for the guy, because obviously I think that he ended up at Haas maybe after being bounced around a little bit in Formula One, but it seems that he's found a team that really fits his personality.
Exactly.
And I don't know if that's the difference maybe in the culture between, say, a European team and an American team. He seems to me a bit of a relaxed, laid back guy, kind of with a bit of an attitude. So, maybe.
Well, he's got stability now. He has stability in Haas. Gunther Steiner is a great team boss because he actually protects his drivers. He really does. Just watch Grosjean. He's had so much criticism and so many hardships, but he still kind of believes in him, Yeah. And I think with Kevin Magnussen, he remarked at one point that he really liked Haas because there weren't as many, I guess, sponsor events or whatever that he had to go to, that they could really just concentrate mostly on racing. And so even though he's talked about, well, this is a good step in the right direction with Haas, I think if he stays there, I think sky's the limit with him. I don't think he should move on.
No, I think he's in a good spot right there. And who knows? I know that Haas, they've been, at least what they've been saying publicly is that they know where they kind of want to get to, but they're kind of, I think, really managing the growth and the size of the team to go from, I'm not sure exactly how many people they have working for the team right now. Let's just say, throw a number out there, say it's 150. They know that they want to get to, say, 300 or 400 people, but they're not going to expand to that number between, say, the end of this season and the beginning of next. There is like this measured plan, this measured kind of growth that they want to implement in over the next couple of years. And honestly, I think that's a smart way to do it, because to me, that signals a team that is taking this seriously, that they're here for the long run, and they're not just going to come in, just throw a ton of money and basically throw something in the wall and see what sticks. So hopefully that this, what I guess you could call planned growth, is going to work out for them in the long run. Yeah.
If you look at Sauber, they're kind of in the same boat. They're kind of the surprise of the year.
Yes.
Even in qualifying, Marcus Ericsson was 13th.
Yep.
That's better than Esteban Ocon. Well, anyhow, that's pretty much everybody else was either down because of grid penalties or, they were Toro Rosso. But that's I think that's the most impressive thing, is that they're kind of like the Haas of 2016 or 2015 or whatever, when they kind of surprised the grid by how good they were doing. Sauber is the same way this year.
Yeah, when Haas came into Formula One, that's right. That first, what was it, about 3 or 4 races? I think they really punched above their weight, and then I think reality quickly set in thereafter. But definitely, I think it is. He is, like you say, there were guys there that had penalties, but he was ahead of Ocon, he was ahead of Hartley, he was ahead of Stroll, he was ahead of Van Dorn. And, be that as it may, sure, he out, there was a Ricciardo and Gasly that incurred penalties that were at the back of the grid. But I mean, even up until like last year, and of course they had the 2016 spec engine in last year, and that just wasn't designed to go into these modern cars. I mean, we saw basically every race. Sure, we had basically a Mercedes front row lockout, but we also had a Sauber rear row, last row lockout as well, if you want to call it that, with Pascal Wehrlein and Marcus Ericsson. But I think that Charles Leclerc obviously has found a way to make that car work. I mean, I was impressed the first time that he got that car into Q3. We'd seen Wehrlein do similar things occasionally last year, maybe especially in qualifying, get it a little bit further up than maybe most people expected. But this year, Leclerc has done that on a regular basis, and I think that maybe that's motivating Ericsson as well. And that's a good thing, because they're saying that they want to be 4th in the World Championship next year. So that means basically behind Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull, whatever order they finish in 2019, they want to be that best of the rest team. So they're going to have to be up there next year, basically fighting it out with the likes of Haas F1 and Renault, who clearly are fighting for that spot right now. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But Vettel was saying that earlier this week that he definitely, or doesn't necessarily think that they have to rush Charles Leclerc up to Ferrari right away. So that I think is or for next year at any rate, which I think is interesting. I mean, so what would they do? Maybe give Kimi if that's what Seb wants, give Kimi another 1-year deal, and then just maybe call it that, and get Charles into the Ferrari, into the big team for 2020. I guess it depends, because there seems to be a lot of opinions on this topic.
How boring, Mark. How boring.
I know, but the thing is, right, that the Ferrari is typically, I mean, in their history, they've never given a young driver an opportunity like that. So, where Vettel is coming from, is he feeling threatened by one of the young'uns?
Well, he always says he's not threatened, but the what do you call it? The spotlight is on Leclerc at the moment. So I don't know. You may be right.
Yeah, if I don't know, I could see a case both for and against putting Charles in the Ferrari and also keeping him for another year at Sauber, especially if they can actually get more performance and improve that car next year. It might be another season to really, I don't know, develop, really sharpen his skills in Formula One, rather than maybe throw him into Ferrari and all the pressure and into the fishbowl that team is.
Well, let me ask you this. I've heard that before, that if he goes up there, he's going to get swallowed up by Ferrari. What does that mean? What is it about the culture there at Ferrari that would swallow him up, in your opinion?
Well, I guess it would be more reputation, right? I mean, the expectations. I mean, the most famous race team in the entire world, let alone Formula One, right? So, I mean, I think what the expectations, or at least that what I'm looking at right now, is he would have to do better than Kimi Räikkönen is doing currently, because I think that Kimi has quite often over the past couple of years just hasn't quite delivered quite enough. I mean, there was in Canada when he was very, very good in qualifying, and then botched his hot lap in Q3. And this past weekend, same sort of thing. He ran wide in the final corner. He ended up P3. So instead of having a front row lockout for Ferrari, then now Vettel has Valtteri Bottas hanging off of his exhaust pipe. So I think he's basically there to basically help in the championship in the constructors, but also to run a little bit of interference, if you want. Make life tough for Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas if he gets between Sebastian Vettel and one of the Silver Arrows. So I think that's go ahead.
Essentially a support driver.
Basically, yeah. I mean, I think that we saw perfectly the example at Hockenheim on the weekend, exactly the position of Valtteri Bottas and Kimi Räikkönen within Ferrari and Mercedes. I mean, both basically were given the team orders to move over for Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton. I mean, and that's what you would expect. Both of them are scrapping it out at the top of the World Championship. So, yeah, I think that he'd have to be a support driver, like you say, and I think he'd have to be pretty consistent. So, I mean, we know the guy's fast and we know the guy's talented. Whether he could do that on a consistent basis for Ferrari, that's a $64,000 question. And I guess only those that are closest to him, either at Sauber or at Ferrari. I mean, they know him there. Obviously, he's gone through their young drivers program, would know whether or not Charles is ready for the big time. Well, the bigger time. I mean, he's already in the big time racing in Formula One. It just gets bigger depending which team you're racing for. But
to me, he seems like a pretty level-headed kid. Yeah, I don't know him personally, but if they put him into that role as the second driver at Ferrari, I just don't get the sense that he would kind of lose it. It seems like his character is pretty solid at this point.
He's barring very mature.
Barring any drug addictions or whatever you want to call them. I'd have full faith in him. I wonder if Ferrari does as well.
Yeah, I mean, for a guy that's he's 20, right? I believe he's 20 years old. I mean, he's not over 20. Let's put it that way. I mean, he seems very, very mature for a guy of that age. And I mean, take a look at what most of us were doing when we were 20, and the maturity level alone, I think, sets us up. Most of us. Well, I'll put myself into that category. I won't necessarily paint you with that brush, Josh. But
let's not talk about me at 20.
Let's not talk about any of us at 20. But be definitely fascinating to see. But the race itself now, I think, was I guess it sort of unfolded like we expected. I mean, as we saw, Ferrari very, very quick again in qualifying. I thought that at the start of the race, Bottas had a bit of a better start than Vettel, but Vettel had just enough speed to really keep himself in front, especially going into that first corner. And it was basically those three cars, and then Max Verstappen in P4, just kind of running off down the road, and Max soon lost touch. And then, Lewis, I think Lewis did a very good job of carving his way through the field. I thought that he was very understated on Saturday when he was interviewed after qualifying. I think he said, well, this is the track that is basically one of the worst to overtake on, but he certainly proved quite the opposite during the race itself. I mean, he was all the way up to fifth, it seemed, in very quick order. But it was funny too, I thought, with the pit stops, what with the front runners going with the ultra softs, Lewis going for the softs, and Danny Ricciardo at the back. Of course, I expected him to cut his way through the field a lot quicker than he did, but I just don't think he could get enough temperature and grip into those tires compared to say Lewis, that was really slicing his way through the pack quite quickly. Obviously, Ricciardo retired halfway through the race for second time in 3 races. We saw that happen a couple of weeks ago in Austria, and a similar kind of issue this past weekend. But Ferrari trying to fake out, I think, Mercedes to a certain extent, bringing in Kimi Räikkönen quite early on for his first pit stop. I don't know if that was planned. I don't know if Kimi had any issues with graining or blistering, or he had some sort of issue with the set of tires that he had. But if that was what they were trying, that certainly was a tactic that did not work.
No, didn't at all. I was very impressed with Lewis Hamilton's drive, mainly for one reason, is the way that he was able to preserve his tires. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was a huge stint on those softs. And I think eventually that would have won him the race anyway. I mean, not won him the race, but it would have helped him to get to the front and fight for the lead in the race. Even though the rain came out even though all that other stuff happened or whatever, I think on his ultra softs he could have caught up to Vettel and challenged him anyway, since Vettel's tires were on such a long stint.
Yeah, sadly, we'll never know how that could have played out. And you mentioned it there, the rain. And I thought it was quite interesting because we get the Sky Sports feed up here in Canada on TSN, and just listening to Crofty and Brundle during the broadcast kept talking about the rain coming and the spotters around the track and the radar and this and that, and then even Räikkönen at one point said that he had raindrops on his visor, and I can't even remember which corner it was. But here I am, I'm looking at the shots as they go around the circuits. Sure, you can see some dark clouds here and there, but you see the cars going into the pits, and it definitely, the way the weather came, it came out over one end of the circuit, because of the other end by the stadium looked it looked quite sunny and at least bright enough that it didn't look like it was going to rain. But when it came, it was really kind of odd the way that it happened. The most of the rain started at the backside of the circuit at turn 6, which is the big hairpin at the northeast corner of the track, and that got a little bit slick. And then we saw all sorts of weird things, guys going in for inters, guys going in for fresh sets of slicks, guys going in for full wets, and some guys staying out on the tracks. And it sure made things interesting, shall we say.
Yeah, Toro Rosso went in for full wets. That was the stupidest thing you could ever do. But, I don't know. It's just, when you see it on the camera and it's coming down, it looked like it was coming down really, really hard.
Yeah.
But in reality, it probably was coming down at a medium clip. So, you could have to go by what your drivers say. And apparently some of the drivers were saying it was really wet, and other drivers were saying, well, I think we can make it. But it's just so interesting how Mercedes was like a cat. When the rain came, they stayed on their ultra softs. And I mean, that's taking a huge risk, but it paid off.
Yeah, and I think that to a certain extent, ever since Austria a couple of weeks ago, I think that their tactics have been a little bit suspect. Over the past several years, I think they've had the benefit of just having the best, the quickest car, that they would always have that gap. Basically, they'd have the luxury of being out front. So if they had to deal with a problem, that if they had to make an extra pit stop, that if Lewis Hamilton or Rosberg or Bottas or whoever's driving one of those cars would have that distance, have that gap or that buffer between himself and the car behind them. But this year, just with the things being as tight and as unpredictable as they are, that it hasn't always worked out that way. I mean, Lewis obviously was very, very critical of the team, regardless of the double DNF in Austria a couple of weeks ago. He was just very critical of what he saw as a very flawed pit strategy that dropped him down the race order and prevented him from really challenging. And again, there were questions at the British Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago as well, that there was late in the race the opportunity when they had that double safety car after there a couple of crashes there, Ericsson, and then
right.
They had, so
they elected not to pit.
That's right, yeah. Whereas the other teams did, and we know now that we've known for some time that Red Bull is master of the double stack. So it seems like every time there's a safety car, that they'll find a way to get both of their guys in and out on fresh rubber under a safety car, and it usually works. But this time we did see a safety car during the Grand Prix, and well, that was all to do with the fact that Sebastian Vettel, according to Nico Rosberg, was pushing just a little bit too hard, or harder than he needed to in those wet conditions, and then put his car into the gravel trap, and had a tantrum of epic proportions, the way that he was banging the steering wheel. And honestly, I'd love to hear that that race radio, but it was disappointing to see. Joking aside, I've been saying for a while now that I don't really care who wins the world championship these days, as not as long as it's Lewis Hamilton. And no disrespect to Lewis, but
right.
It would be nice to have a little bit of a variety. So this year, the Ferrari challenge looks more legit. It looks more real than in 2017. And so it was heartbreaking to see Sebastian go off like that. And I can understand completely why he was banging the steering wheel and probably screaming all sort of 4-letter words into his helmet.
Well, I can completely see, everybody thinks that when people complain about Hamilton winning or Hamilton getting a good call when he should get penalized, it's not that we don't like Hamilton. I love Hamilton. It's not like we hate Hamilton. It's that we're bored. We're bored of seeing Mercedes and Hamilton win.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe the core issue. Some people may hate Hamilton, and I don't know why. He's a good guy. But I think it's just boredom. Most fans are bored of seeing. It was the same with Schumacher.
Yep.
We were bored of seeing Schumacher win all the time. Now to Sebastian Vettel. Yeah, he was banging on his steering wheel. I can completely understand why he would be doing that.
Yeah.
He's at his home race. He took pole position, and the race was pretty much in his hands. Besides the tire strategy, it was in his hands. And then the aftermath is kind of told us everything, right? When he got on the radio and he was talking to his team. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. And, it really says a lot, but also the things that have kind of come out since since the race, Seb was saying that, he's not going to sleep, or he's not going to lose sleep over that German Grand Prix crash. But then he's also at the same time, he's regretting that one small mistake that he made. And it was very much kind of like that Magnussen had during qualifying there. Same corner, but obviously it was dry, and then K-Mag, he went into that corner with some understeer, got wide, went into the gravel, but Vettel, he was out front. All he really needed to do was keep his car on the track, and, he was the one that really needed to manage the race. And unfortunately, if you look at all the guys that didn't finish that race, two of them were the Williams, which is no real surprise. One was Fernando Alonso, which again isn't always a surprise, and then of course was Danny Ricciardo. So out of two of the six top drivers, to see Sebastian Vettel and Ricciardo go out, obviously Vettel going out under his own mistake rather than a mechanical failure, really is quite shocking. And then you see the ramifications that it has now for the World Championship. He goes home with no points, and he was enjoying a lead in the championship now. And now Lewis has opened up a bit of a gap, not a huge one.
17-point lead. 17-point
lead, which it's not huge, but it's big enough. It gives him a bit of comfort. So he's got 100
pressure on Vettel.
It does now. It puts a lot of pressure on Vettel. So that but I was thinking to myself too earlier this year that I think that I don't know if it's too early or too premature to make this, but I can make the argument of for Lewis winning the World Championship this year is just because he's more consistent than Vettel. I mean, just take two examples of Vettel not getting it right this year was obviously this past weekend in Germany, and then also in Azerbaijan at a couple of months ago when they had that safety car at the end of the race, and then he tried to at the end of the start finish straight there, tried to outbrake himself and everybody else, and then just ended up running wide and then dropping back and dropping points in that situation. And you don't see Lewis Hamilton making mistakes or doing things like that. I mean, it's all, I guess, one thing to be gun ho and all glory or nothing, but at the end of the day, the entire season, I mean, with 21 races, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and you got to get points where you can get them, because at the end of the day, we could be sitting here a couple of months from now at the end of November and looking, Sebastian, he missed out on the World Championship. He was 20 points behind. Well, where did those 20 points? Where did they get dropped? Well, let's take the German Grand Prix in Azerbaijan just as two examples.
And China, it says he's eighth.
Yeah. Well, that of course was not really his fault. That was when he got T-boned by Max Verstappen, and then and got and dropped back through the order. But so, I mean, that's a little bit more his own misfortune rather than say his miscalculation.
Right?
Yeah, it's very interesting. But I guess that was obviously one big talking point in the race, and then also when the safety car came out was, and this is the one that's really drawn a bunch of criticism. There's been two big talking points I've seen on social media since the Grand Prix on Sunday. One is a lot of anger. I wouldn't just say disappointment with the team orders between Ferrari and Mercedes. So I've seen a lot of people, frankly, angry and very vocal about that, but a lot of people equally frustrated, if not more frustrated, the fact that Lewis going into the pits under the safety car was waved off by his team at the very last moment. He was already in the pit entry, and then veered off, went through the grass and back onto the track. Kimi Räikkönen did something similar in Azerbaijan a couple of years ago. He was given a 5-second penalty. Lewis afterwards being summoned to the stewards, explained himself and was just given a reprimand. He wasn't given a penalty in any shape or form. And then race director Charlie Whiting was saying afterwards that there was no real precedent for what Lewis did. And honestly, I think that's a cop out by the FIA.
Me too.
Because I think you have rules and they're clear cut, because he's saying, well, it didn't endanger anybody. They're already under a safety car. And I don't really care. I think you have one rule and it should be black and white. If there's too much leeway and too much of a gray area when it comes to the rule, I think the rule needs to be rewritten, because it's one thing to be told to stay back out onto the track. But, when you see, they say, well, there isn't really a precedent, but something similar happened with Räikkönen a couple of years ago, and we gave him a penalty then. I just don't like that. And regardless if it's Hamilton or anybody else on the grid, just make a dang rule and stick to it.
Well, it was the very, very last second, I mean, the wall was right there, and he crossed right in front of the pit wall. And, race control can say that, well, it was under the safety car. Well, under the safety car, you can still have people. I mean, you can still have drivers driving down the track, or somebody coming behind the person that's going to the pit. What if they come, try to get off the pit road at that time? That causes some safety issues. So I agree with you. If they could have had a blanket rule, or kept the rule pure to what it said, the actual words, I think that would have been more effective. So penalize the driver. Then afterwards, that's when you discuss it and say, okay, we need to change it. This seems to be like more of an executive order than it is legislating the rule.
Yeah, and it almost seems to a little bit to, well, we don't really have a rule for this, so let's just kind of go with something, because we don't want to upset Mercedes or Lewis Hamilton or whatever. To me, it just kind of felt like they're making something up on the fly. And, I say, regardless what it is, I mean, if there's say a 5-second time penalty, for example, then apply that 5-second penalty. So what would have happened in this case if they gave Lewis that 5-second penalty? He still gets second place. He still gets 18 points. He still pulls out a gap on Sebastian Vettel. I mean, obviously it would have been disappointing, but hey, if you break a rule, you break a rule. But yeah, then his teammate wins the race instead. But yeah, I mean, when they have like the rule in place at the other end of the pit lane, if you're coming back out after pit stop, and if you cross over that white line, then everybody knows what the ramifications for that are. So,
well, when a fan like myself, like a lay fan like myself, looks at that and says, "Whoa, something's wrong with that," you would think that the race control would be able to see the same type of thing. It just seems so blatant.
Yeah.
And why do you have to justify something? And I'm not quite sure why they did it. We can conjecture and say maybe it was because they wanted, the championship. He's part of the the championship. He's running for P1 in the championship. So let's not ruin this. I guess we could think that way, but I don't know. It just seems a little suspect, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's very easy, Josh, at this point to pull out the tinfoil and start coming up with conspiracy theories in one way or another, why they did or why they didn't, and what the motivations could have been for either case. But it definitely would have made the championship a little bit tighter, obviously. But it's just
not by much.
Not by much. I mean, and of course now it's all hindsight is 2020, so it is one of those things that.
Not to beat a dead horse, but I'm going to beat a dead horse. Another reason why it seems so weird is because Raikkonen was dinged with a 5-second penalty, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Right before that. And then Hamilton gets a reprimand for hissing, and the justification, as you said, was because it was during under the safety car. So that's another reason why it became so confusing. Is like, wait a second, you just did this. It's almost like you set a precedent with Raikkonen's penalty, and then you turn around and you change it for somebody else. That's which is Hamilton, which is why some people don't like it. Is because it's Hamilton. For me, it's just because it just seemed weird that they had just given Raikkonen a penalty and then they turned around and didn't give one to Lewis Hamilton. So anyhow, we can end on that.
Yeah, I know it, but it's kind of fascinating now because if you look at the way that the championship is shaping up, I mean, not only is Lewis back on top in the drivers, but if you look at the constructors, then they get the 1-2 finish, and now they've gone back into the lead with 310 points compared to 302 for Ferrari. I mean, still we're only at the halfway point in the season, and let's face it, I mean, we're going to Hungary this weekend, and this is the race where there's only two things that really matter. One is where you qualify, and if you don't qualify on pole, you're basically screwed. And and if you don't qualify on pole, then it matters how close you are to the guy that did qualify on pole, and hope that in the pit stop, the undercut or the overcut works, and you can gain track position through your pit stop, because it may be out in the countryside, but it's often been referred to as a very similar track to Monaco. And the drivers were very critical of Monaco this year, and we haven't really seen too many classic races at Hungary over the years. I mean, it's not usually very many overtaking opportunities, so we'll see. But looking at 2017 Hungary,
guess who the top two were?
Well, that was right, because last year was Vettel who won the race, but he had that steering issue, and just the way that the track is, that he was able basically just to park himself at the front of the race order, and basically frustrated everybody else behind him. I can't remember off the top of my head what the gap between Vettel and the top four cars was, because I think it was Vettel and then Raikkonen, and then was it Hamilton and Bottas? I can't remember off the top of my head.
No, the interval between Yeah, it was only a second between Raikkonen and Vettel, and then it was 11 seconds between Bottas and Raikkonen.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, there was something at the end of the race where one of them really dropped off at the end. But there was one point right when sort of the thick of the race and the heat of the battle that I think that the race order was much closer. All right, well, Josh, let's move away now from the German Grand Prix and all the controversy there, and just in the time that we have remaining, let's talk about some of the news that's out there. Obviously, the big news that came out prior to the Grand Prix was Lewis Hamilton's new 2-year deal with Mercedes, and I think that's obviously the deal that everybody was waiting for. I think that now that we've seen that, obviously, then Bottas was given a new 1-in-1 contract for 2019, and then a team option for 2020. Daniel Ricciardo is rumored to be signing or be announced as signing a new contract with Red Bull Racing before the summer break after the Hungarian Grand Prix this week. And then I think that was basically it. I think that as time went on, even though things were up in the air as it took, the time to get Hamilton's deal sorted and announced, I think that's was really the key to it all. But just as it seemed every week that it kind of dragged on, it seemed less likely that there would be any other, I think, realistic opportunity to join another contender for Ricciardo other than Red Bull. So, I mean, obviously we're going to see him there. But I think the thing that was really interesting was how Lewis really dropped a hint that another team made a serious offer to him. Of course, he didn't say who it is, but I'd be interested to know who it was and what sort of offer they would have made him, because the money that Lewis has been or is going to make in the next 2 years is compared to Neymar money, and people that follow world soccer knows that he's one of the highest guy paid in world soccer. So Lewis is making bank, as they say.
Well, I think we know he's making more than LeBron, so that's saying something.
Yeah, that is saying something. But
well,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that was expected. But one thing that has come up lately, and I'm not sure if you're going to be going into this, but and these are rumors. I don't know if you do rumors here, but
we love rumors.
Oh yeah, well, the rumor is that Stroll bought Force India or whatever, and we don't know if he bought it outright or if he bought it. He got a portion of it. But the rumors of Lance Stroll going to Force India before that were also kind of rampant. And I didn't understand that, but now I understand it a lot more if Lawrence Stroll is involved.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense that if Daddy Stroll is buying the team, and it just makes sense because the story that I was hearing just looking, researching for the show last week is I think that Sergei Sirotkin is bringing something like 15 million euros of sponsorship to Williams each and every year. Basically, that he has a contract with the team, and Lance now in his second year with Williams. I think basically the way that it was arranged, that the money that he was bringing or that his backers were contributing was sort of on a decreasing scale each and every year. So, if that indeed is the case, and if Lawrence has the money to buy the team itself, I mean, it makes perfect sense. And like we were saying at the top of the show, I mean, that team obviously needs something, and maybe a new owner. And obviously, I mean, the Strolls are a racing family. They're very motivated. I mean, a lot of people, and I think a little bit unfairly to a certain degree, sort of paint Lance as the spoiled rich kid that whose daddy bought him an F2 team and then possibly a Formula One team. But I mean, he has been in a Williams the past 2 years, and how good his talent actually is, we won't really know, because I mean, the Williams wasn't that great last year, and it's a hell of a lot worse this year.
Well, so he had seven. Last year, he had Stroll had 7 top 10s and a podium within those 7 top 10s, and I'm thinking that's a pretty good rookie year.
Yeah, for a guy that was 19 last year, whatever he was. So
I think he was 18 last year. He's 19 now.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. I'm getting started to lose track about all these really young guys that are racing in Formula One. But
it is kind of getting discombobulated, isn't it?
I know. Consider if you take two of them and add their ages together, I'm still older than them, so that's depressing. But hey, that's a different story. But just talking about other rumors that are out there. I mean, the big names that were there were obviously Hamilton, Bottas, and then the imminent announcement that seems is going to break at any time that Ricciardo's going to re-sign with Red Bull. But the one that I find really interesting is Carlos Sainz, who's obviously a Red Bull driver in a Renault, saying that he wants his next F1 contract to be a 2-year deal. Okay, Carlos, that's great, but where?
But where, and have you done enough to show that you're worth that?
Well, exactly. That's a great point. I mean, the only real option that I see for him as a Red Bull driver is to go back to Toro Rosso, if that is even an option right now. Because obviously with the dissolution of the Renault Red Bull partnership and the way that really unraveled, and I mean, even before Red Bull officially said no, I mean, Renault said that they didn't want to, or supply them with engines for 2019 and 2020, but just to that rule that Formula One has, that if even though they didn't want to and the deal was up, if Red Bull still wanted them to supply engines, they were bound by the rules to do so. But now that it's officially over and Red Bull is officially partnered with Honda for next year, they have no reason to keep, a Red Bull driver in their car, considering it was just kind of a lone, kind of a temporary situation to begin with. And even though Brendan Hartley in the other Toro Rosso has not really impressed all that much, there have been other names mentioned out there, other younger Red Bull drivers. So I don't really know if there's anywhere for Carlos Sainz to go, really.
Well, I think Toro Rosso would be as good as any other team to go to. They are kind of on the rise, a little bit on the rise. They haven't been doing so well lately, but I think it would be a good fit. He has also been connected with McLaren. They may have talked to him about that, and I think that would be a great fit as well. But at the same time, I don't know. He's kind of a midfield racer. He's not He's not outperforming Ocon. Which, if he were, let's see here, Ocon, right? No, that's Perez. Sorry, we're talking about Renault. He's not outperforming Hülkenberg. So I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I say, the only other maybe move I could see other than back to Toro Rosso would be with one of those other midfield teams, and Force India would be one possibility, but that team seems to be in a bit of an unknown area at the moment. It seems like something's going to happen. Then the other one would be Sauber, but I think that as long as Marcus Ericsson has money, I think that he's going to get a seat there. And I mean, he seems, really? Okay. I could be wrong on that one. I just, he seems just to keep showing up each and every year. So unless something changes, I just expect to see Marcus Ericsson in Formula One in Sauber next year basically because it's become the default setting, to put it bluntly. And then, of course, we don't know what's happening with Charles Leclerc. I mean, Vasseur, the team principal there, said that Raikkonen would be an interesting fit for Sauber. But I mean, if they were to say switch Kimi from Ferrari and Leclerc get his seat there, I don't know at 38 years old whether Raikkonen would want to go to a team like Sauber. I mean, maybe they do get things turned around. Maybe they will get it to, produce that car that could get them to be the best of the rest and fourth in the world championship. And certainly a guy with the experience like Kimi Räikkönen would be an asset. Whether or not he would actually want to do that, that's another question. Renault seems to be, well, I think that Hülkenberg has a contract till the end of next year, and it seems to be like almost I wouldn't say an open secret, but I would say at least the expectation at this point is that Ocon is probably going to get that second seat. And you could see the reason why. I mean, talented young French guy and an up-and-coming French team trying to reestablish themselves. So
exactly,
yeah. It just when the music stops, I just don't know if there's going to be a chair for Carlos Sainz to sit down on when it's all said and done.
Well, there is a need there is a need on the grid for drivers. I don't know if Norris is coming in, Russell may be coming in. Who knows who else is coming in who has money, but. in Sauber, if they're talking about Raikkonen going to Sauber, okay, let's put him in there. If we did put him in there, I don't know about Ericsson. I have Giovinazzi as the second, as their other driver. Is it going to be Ericsson Giovinazzi, or is it going to be Raikkonen Giovinazzi? And I have the same question. Is Raikkonen really going to want to take that ride?
Exactly. And interesting that you should mention that, because I believe Giovinazzi is going to get a test there at the test session that they always hold after Hungary each and every year. So, Josh, we're just about out of time here. Before we go, we just want to make mention one more piece of news, and that is Sergio Marchionne has left his role as Fiat and Ferrari CEO with immediate effect, as unexpected complications from surgery have left him unable to return to work. So, obviously, you don't like to hear somebody having to leave their job, especially something like that, as a result of ill health. So, we hope certainly that he gets back to recovers sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
And then finally, before we go, I just want to give a quick shout out to the new Twitter followers here, and that is on our Twitter account, and that is at Scuderia F1 Pod, and that a big shout out to Hillary Go, Pit Lane F1, Aaron Kayalo, and Dan Eversole. And again, Josh, thanks so much for coming to hang out tonight. And before you go, just remind everybody where they can find you on social media and chime in or join into whatever you're discussing.
Well, thank you for having me. And you can find me on Twitter at Mayor of Shimtown. That's Mayor of, SHIMITOWN.
Very cool. And like I said, you can follow this podcast at Scuderia F1 Pod. And of course, we'd love it if you would and leave us a 5-star review and a nice rating on Apple Podcasts or Google Play or whichever platform you use to download and listen to the show. Anyways, that is a wrap for now. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you guys again very soon.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.